Good evening. This week we're going to start our work on fractions, and tonight we're going to talk a little bit about comparing fractions. Last week we also compared fractions, but when we compared the fractions, we looked at fractions with the same denominator. So when we were dealing with fractions that had the same denominator, we just simply looked at the numerator and picked out the bigger or smaller or whatever it was that we were looking for. And it was really pretty simple. This week, when we move into fractions and we start comparing them, we're actually going to be doing different denominators. So tonight I'm going to show you an example of a couple different strategies that you can use to compare fractions, and I'm going to be working with these two fractions, 2/5 and 4/7. The first way you can compare fractions is by using the benchmark method. Basically what the benchmark method is going to do, it's going to take the fractions that you're working with, so in this case 2/5 and 4/7, and what you're going to do is you're going to draw a picture, and as you draw your picture you want to think of a fraction that's really easy to work with. So the most common benchmark fraction to work with is 1/2. So as I draw my picture, also remember that the shapes you draw to represent your fractions, make sure that they're the same size so that you can accurately compare them. So this top one we're going to cut into fifths, like that. And I have 2/5, so I'm going to shade in two of them. And on this bottom one, I have sevenths, so I'm going to go ahead and cut that into sevenths. Like that. And then I'm going to shade in 4. Like that. Okay. Now, one of the great things about drawing the shapes the same size is you can already clearly tell that since they're the same size, that this 4/7, which is down at the bottom, is already larger. You can already tell that just because it's taking up more space. When you do the benchmark, what you do though is you basically cut your two boxes in half. So I'm going to cut this one in half. Okay, so that's where half is on that fraction box. And then down here, that's going to be half. Okay, and then by looking at that benchmark, you're going to be able to make a statement. So 2/5, looking at this, it's clearly smaller than a half. 4/7, this box was shaded in right here. The whole box was. So this is actually probably going to be a little bit bigger 4/7 than the half. People also look at it as, a numeric benchmark where 4 is more than halfway towards 7, 2 is not halfway towards 5. So that would be the benchmark method, okay? The second way you can do this is by looking at the denominator and trying to change the denominator. So as you look at the denominators, you have on this one a little bit more difficult job here because you have 2/5, 4/7, and what you want to do is you want to first look and see if there's a way to change the 5 to a 7 or the 7 to a 5. In this case, there's not. So what you'd want to do is you'd want to pick out something that they have in common. In this case, it would be something like 35. And then you're going to ask yourself, all right, how do I get from 5 to 35? And remember, we talked last week about how if you do something with your fractions, if you change the denominator or you change the numerator, you have to treat your fractions fairly. So for this 5, since we're changing it to a 35, we ask ourselves, how did we get from 5 to 35? We multiplied by 7. So if we have the 2 up here, we're also going to have to multiply that by 7. Same with the 7. How did we get from 7 to 35? We multiplied by 5. So when we go from the 4, we're also going to have to multiply by 5, and we get 20/35. Now that they have the same denominator, again, you can see that this 4/7, it's a bigger fraction than the 2/5. Okay? All right, one last note here. I know some students in the past might have done their comparing by doing the cross multiplication, or some people call it the butterfly method. That's an alright way to go about it. It's a good way to check your work, but the thing that is kind of changed with our curriculum this year in doing the comparing fractions is that they're actually going to have to, like everything else, write about it and be able to explain about it. Especially in 5th grade next year, where they're going to have to write about it on the EOG. And while it works, it's kind of a good math trick. It's hard to explain why 4/7 is bigger than 2/5. Just cross multiplying. And from what I understand, in the future, they're trying to actually get people to look at specifically why is this bigger than this, and not use cross multiplication as an excuse. As the quarter goes on, we're actually going to also be learning fraction or decimals and percents. And when we learn decimals and percents, that's going to be an additional way that they can compare them, is actually by turning them into a decimal or turning them into a percent, and then being able to say, like 2/5 is 40%, for example, and that's going to be less than this, which is 63%, or something like that. So anyway, I hope this was helpful. I hope it gives you some good ideas of what you're doing this week with comparing fractions. Thank you.